So, Jacques Attali, winners and losers in the coming world order, or as we've said, the age of Aquarius, from his book in 1991. Only the most fortunate, rich nomads. Again, we're nomads because we have all of our identity that we had packed onto us in the previous age, the age of Pisces, our nationality, our ethnicity, our religions, those are unpacked for the age of Aquarius. Aquarius, again, rolls out the vat. If you look at it in esoteric terms, that's what it's rolling out. All of that identity, in part given to us from the age of Pisces, or to some extent, the age of Christ. And we're going to spill that out because it ties in too much with, they want to not start entirely whole cloth here, but we're turning a big corner, says Jacques. The rich nomads will have the means to become property owners. Oh, so there's going to be property owners. So this is very much like H.G. Wells' world dictatorship that was part and parcel of fascism and communism and the planks of the United Nations in the large cities. So not many people are going to own property. You're going to be spending too much time, I guess, worshiping the master class, which will be the magnetic poles for the brethren from all areas of the regions. I guess these are the mega cities you hear about of the globe. Cities will be fortified, dangerous places, and the tangled heart of electronic networks, a cable field of dreams. It's a dangerous place with a cable. I wonder if something was lost in the French to English there. A cable field of dreams, or if he's alluding to, the virtual uploading of our consciousness there. So I want to bear in mind for this transition from Pisces to Aquarius for the new year. We're always talking about a crisis here, a crisis there. Well, it's an interesting way that Carol Quigley talked about this in Tragedy and Hope. Quigley says that a change that would happen in 50 years of peace could happen in 5 years. And again, these are alchemists. These are people that are at a grand historical level want to transition history in order to transition humans and their nature is the final prize that they're shooting for, the great work. So 5 years of war, you can change minds and hearts as fast as just 50 years of people doing the social engineering on you. So 100 years of war would be like the change of, 1,000 years of peace. 100 years of war would probably be enough to bring about it. Okay. So what does he say? Any war, this is Quigley now, any war performs two rather contradictory services for the social context in which it occurs. On the one hand, it changes the minds of men, especially the defeated, about the factual power relationship between the combatants. And that's one theme that von Clausewitz would talk about in his 1832 book, Total War. He would talk about a real true changing of the minds and hearts had to come from a massive, mighty defeat. Your enemy had to be essentially just ground down, demoralized, and then he would take on your worldview, your religion, and so forth. But if you kind of did it halfway, fought a sort of politically correct war, no, that wasn't going to cut it. So you did a war that really smashes and demoralizes the enemy is the ideal one if you want to change truly the hearts and minds of the people. And on the other hand, it alters the factual situation itself so that changes which in peacetime might have occurred over decades are brought about in a few years. So that's just to bear in mind when we're going through transitions work best. And that's convenient because the merchant bankers or the international bankers or the private bankers or the Federal Reserve bankers are pretty famous over the last 300 years, although I'd go even further back with that, to prompting wars to happen, financing both sides. Each nation goes into debt, and then the leadership is demoralized, marries into that class, and like it or not, becomes part of the Great Work project. So, Jacques Attali, Brief History of the Future. Now, I'm jumping ahead to a couple ideas he has more recently in 2006 when he's painting for us a picture of the future. And he's still talking about winners and losers, but he's just got a couple other brushstrokes he's throwing in there. He's predicting here the fall of the United States empire around 2035. So I guess, I don't know how it's going to be on the long slope down, but this grand project of the Venetian black nobility to kind of build up Europe in its own image through the Italian city states, especially Florence, moving over to Portugal and Spain, Holland, and then seeing the United Kingdom and the United States as the final extension of their global plan to make a world dictatorship. And it all sounds funny unless you can trace one piece of history or look at current conditions that does not square with that hypothesis. Never, not to mention the centuries, go back to my sources list, pages of sources that square with this hypothesis. Yet it doesn't get discussed at the universities. Isn't that funny how that works? It would be followed. This is the death of the United States, which is, I would argue the Anglo-American iteration of this uh, movement of empire from the ancient world. And not to beat this down, I'm just pulling in some of our earlier stuff, from Mesopotamia to Persia, Greece, Rome. We have kind of an hourglassing in with the fall of Rome. These empires are essentially guided by a genealogy, alchemical mixture of these elites. They don't just jump ship, when Persia starts to fall or Mesopotamia. They intermarry all along with the other empires. So they're part of this alchemical process themselves. And if you want to look at the statue in the book of Daniel, I think that can be helpful when we move from the bronze to the Roman legs. And so it hourglasses with the Venetian black nobility. The banking class and the aristocracy would intermix there in the swamps outside of Italy. And they would take that system of oligarchy, and they're called the black nobility again because their practices were very black indeed. And they would form the modern aristocracy, who, by the way, saw themselves as having the divine right to rule because they did think they were the progenitors of the seed of David, which gave them the divine right. So them intermarrying with this banking class was never really that radical, especially when they do hold the same esoteric worldview. It would be followed by this polycentric world. The book of Daniel would sometimes call it the 10 toes, if you want to just see how ancient prophecy squares with what's going on today. And again, the legs are the extension of the Holy Roman Empire and its iterations, again, in Spain, Holland, England. Hence, as Tarpley notes, all of the symbolism of Rome and the Holy Roman Empire that is part and parcel of the European aristocracy because they see themselves as part of the one empire project. They are the alchemically fused oligarchical class that is using empire as a vehicle to the final world federation, the world dictatorship that's going to be based on biological precepts of control, hence biopolitics, hence esoteric biopolitics. Urbanization, again, we talked about the stack and pack cities of the future, whether or not that's being realized as we speak. The urbanization, people moving in, it's going to force more of us to breathe. And of course, that's going to create more pollution because we're breathing, because they said it was, they said it was. This would cause further carbon dioxide, accelerating global warming. So they're very concerned about this, and what we're going to be breathing in. So they're very concerned about this. So back to 1991 with Jacques Attali, he's saying one day, in addition to essentially needing to get chipped, where do you think they're going to put the chip? Do you think they're going to put it here? Do you think they'll put it here? Where do you think they'll decide to put that chip? One day, everyone will wear a wrist instrument. If you're chipping everybody, I don't know if you still need a wristwatch that will continuously record your heartbeat, artillery. Now, why do you think that the powers that be, the world dictatorship, was so concerned with your heartbeat? Might it be, as I have in my commentary down there, because you're you are hurting Gaia, Mother Earth, with your breathing, and they want to record that and perhaps tax you or evaluate you based on how much damage you're doing to Gaia, Mother Earth. And so, where that concern has now taken us, because in order to fix this, uh, if you want to look at Richie from Boston, does a lot of this kind of stuff, the researchers from Harvard and so forth. Aluminum, barium, and strontium, it's been revealed, as being sprayed into the atmosphere because we don't have to use common sense anymore and wonder how somehow those materials are going to combat human CO2, plant food. And so if you haven't looked up in the sky, there's probably two narratives. The official narrative that they're combating CO2 and global warming, C. Brzezinski, or the other esoteric view, which means that somehow they, as the wild men, the grand alchemists, and we're on the altar of this as humanity, are controlling, as UNESCO would say, everything that goes into our minds and bodies. And so we don't know why they want us to breathe this stuff. But what I do know is that the official story stinks to high heaven. So Jacques, again from 2006, he's talking about this future, and he's going to call everybody's a type of nomad because you've lost your identity, your religion, your ethnicity, all those things. You're giving it over to this new, it's not unlike when you think about communism, right? You're there to serve the state. You're part of a collective. So the nation state will become irrelevant. So part of that processing is to move the sovereignty of each and every nation, as Carol Quigley would say, into the hands of these private international bankers. And it's going to be irrelevant, and it's going to be transformed into a market. Now, is it going to be like a free market? Did Attali begin this by saying markets are free? Or is that just kind of a buzzword, this market? The entire planet would work according to an ultra liberal economy. So he's already conceded that the economy is entirely controlled by the elite. So now it's ultra liberal. Does that mean it's, again, word speak? Ultra liberal is word speak for ultra restricted in terms of who gets the profits and decides the products on the market. The citizen would see themselves as global citizens. And I'll tell you my take on this. Man, woman has two selves. One's a psychological self and one's an economic self. The economic self of us, I think, wants things from all around the world as cheap as possible. But the psychic self, it wants things to be very small, not grand all around the world, small. We want an identity. We want to belong from street ABZ. Look at the music people listen to. It's music that identifies a specificity, a location, a type of people. That's what makes us satisfied. So these two parts of ourselves are fighting. We want everything from around the world, but we also want to belong to a people. And we don't get up in the morning singing a song from Attali here. We are global citizens and we want to work for a higher purpose that the master class defines for us, because it's just doesn't sound that catchy and probably won't get your psychic self that excited. But again, as Bertrand Russell would say, and as the Huxleys would say, through the right combinations of drugs and technological wizardry, we can teach you to love your servitude and love to serve the master class. So that's why they're oh so concerned about what's going into your bodies. So finally, he's saying this is all going to be brought together based upon a micro credit system. And, if you have this chip instead of, the cash, of course, someone can decide what's money going into the chip, money taken out of the chip, if you're going to live or die, at least if you're going to eat or not eat. And this idea of collective intelligence. Well, it sounds collective. Is that good? We all get some intelligence, or is it more like collective government, where it exists purportedly like communism for the good of the people, but it's really was created and run by international bankers who usurped all the nation's resources for themselves? Well, collective intelligence, again, I'm going to go back to Attali's quotes. What does he mean by collective intelligence? Well, he said, remember that an elite controls the market and prices and products. The elite accumulates profits, controls, and salaries and workers. They even the creative aspects of it. They're going to decide if it suits their purposes. The elite defines the ideology. I call the elite the oligarchs. And it's the same oligarchical class that goes back to the earliest empires. That's they rule by through empire, and in the democratic age, as Plato says, they use the facade of democracy and the tools of propaganda to control from behind the scenes. But in the age of Aquarius, they're going to come out again. That's why they're externalizing the hierarchy. And they programmed you into such a way that when they tell you what they're doing, like this, people just get blank because they love their servitude. What am I going to say? That's how the system was made. They told us that they're externalized. In the final externalization, they're going to come out as demigods. And Bertrand Russell says, they're going to be increasingly appear like another species, and that might be material, and that might be a part of perception. The elite defines the ideologies that supports its powers. So when we look at collective intelligence, once if you get esoteric on this, you can see it's all figuring into this singularity, the great work, the final transcendence. And part of that, and certainly Jacques Attali doesn't get into it, is the population control. That piece in esoteric terms that we see from the Kabbalah and so many other sources that we discussed is the lower classes, the lower races are holding them down. So they're going to have to jettison some of those. And that's been done over the last 50 years very effectively through family planning or, eugenics, crypto eugenics. But they're taking it to another level. And that's where we're getting into the mixture of man and machine, transhumanism and that whole discourse. So, what I see essentially, my take on this, and I've seen this from other sources, it's a system of neo-feudalism. The the clashing of Soviet communism and radical capitalism come together, and the alchemical fusion is going to bring you a type of neo-feudalism. And when I think of feudalism, I've always explained it as kind of think of a chessboard. There's certain royal prerogatives given to some pieces on the board, and some are simply pawns. Other get some virtues by perhaps mind control through religion, others through their bloodlines. But you're going to have a ruling class. He's going to call them the hyper nomads. That's the master class. And so that'll be the final working out of them. And they're going to be visible as the master class. And you're going to celebrate them. And it will be back to Plato's triangle, where you are going to come into this world and very few will transition from one class to the next. And again, this is neo-feudalism because it's like the chessboard, but in a cyber techno era. And it will include the technocracy and the managers of that technical system, which are mostly the middle class, according to Telly. They're going to be your technicians, your scientists, and they're going to live rather sedentary lives, I guess, because they're operating, like people on computers today. So that might not be the biggest stretch in the world. And then the next class is going to be the infrano modes, nomads, infrano nomads, and they will exist in misery. And they're expected to revolt. And again, this won't be a clash of nations against each other. Again, it's going to be the classes. It will be what Marx predicted in the final revolution. It's class warfare. And the bread and circus, we gave them the sports and we gave them the cable television. But for some, that bread and circus is not going to work anymore. They're not going to see victories They're not going to sort of bask in this reflective glory of their sports figures and their entertainment idols, but they're going to want to revolt from this system. But who are they? Why do they want? Why is everything so terrible? Who are these people that don't like the age of Aquarius, the New World Order? Well, it's those people that long for their national identities. It's the people that long for their borders, their language, their cultures, their religions, their individual view of God and who they choose to worship. Those are the enemies of the system. So they will probably have to be dealt with in a brave new world fashion or a big brother boot on the face fashion. And it will probably be a mixing and matching of those systems, but propaganda alone won't reach some people. They're still going to want to be individuals, and they're still going to want to connect with their ancestors, and they're still going to want to decide who they are as individuals. And one of those decisions, they might choose not to worship the master race, not to worship their strange gods, and they might ultimately decide that they don't want to be transmuted from human into some kind of beast, which the Creator biblically frowns upon. So thanks again for joining Dr. Deep State.